Affordable family cars. They all used to look like this, then they morphed into this, and now every last one of them looks like this. Which brings us to an important question. Yes, many of them can be referred to as boring, but is there a way to make them less boring? You and I need to start today's discussion with a very honest question. How do you make, no offense, boring transportation more interesting? To my eye, there are two ways. Number one, you could make it look better, and or you could give it more power, at least to a small select group like us. Let's start with that first one, make it look better. And that's where things become challenging. You see, in the car world, they call this a two-box design. Why? This is box number one, and this is box number two, as opposed to the more traditional three-box design, otherwise known as a car. It's been around for 100 years. So there's less creativity that can be done when you have only two boxes. And that in turn brings us back to the budget. Why? Well, if you hadn't noticed, this is not an entirely new vehicle. You see, even for a rich car company like Hyundai, what they do is they make changes right smack dab in the middle of their product cycles, but the budgets are lower, significantly lower than doing the full cycle refresh, which brings out a new car and costs between $3 and $5 billion. Here they take a fraction of that and they change things like the front or rear of the vehicle. Here they make significant changes on the inside, which we'll get to later, but the overall theme is to make it look more muscular, even though it's a crossover. Now put that aside, the big change is what's underneath. Now, it's still on offer as an internal combustion engine as well as a hybrid, which this is, and there will be a coming plug-in hybrid. But most importantly, the output is a bit higher, and that really doesn't impact the fuel economy. So like, for example, the average fuel economy of the gasoline version of this is 26, that's combined. The hybrid flavor, on the other hand, significantly better at pick your poison, city, highway, or combined, 35 mpg. Got some unusual modes to get to, so let's jump right into it. 4,265 pounds, or depending on express your weights and measures, 1,934 kilograms. If this was a lesser model, meaning not as fancy, it would be about 400 pounds less. With that eco mode, foot to the floor. Oh, that's actually pretty good. Now, last time you and I drove one of these things, we learned the hybrid is so much better as an overall vehicle, not just acceleration, than the basic ICE Tucson. And in this updated case, absolutely no different. However, there are updated modes. No one's around. Let's stop on this beautiful central California coast road and switch not to sport, but to baby mode. This is a mode that is designed to not disturb your smaller occupants in the back. With that, foot to the floor. A little bit less torque there in first gear, but the minute it switches, it feels exactly the same as Eco. Nice idea, but I don't really notice the difference here. With that, let's switch into sport mode. Again, I can't really tell there's a huge difference here. I do feel more torque steer in sport mode. The big takeaway, power delivery is significantly better here for two reasons. Number one, it's one of the few hybrids out there that has a real transmission, 6 forward gears that hasn't changed. And number two, this is one of these cases where more power is always just a good thing. A little bit behind the scenes, while you and I were driving the updated Tucson around the stunning central coast of California, Hyundai took the opportunity to give us a sneak peek of the 2025 Ioniq 5. Not a totally new car, an update like the Tucson we're driving. However, 3 important things. Number one, of course, they had to Subaru-ize even this electric car I'll let you talk amongst yourselves about the cladding. Number two, it is now made in the good old US of A. Why is that important? Well, if you're one of the very few people that itemize your deductions, you will be able to qualify for any tax credits, which brings us to point number three, which is also the most important. When you and I first drove the Ioniq 5, we complained about all of the seat controls being buried in a screen. Well, apparently someone was listening, and now, hard buttons for seat controls in the center console. And with that, I'm just gonna say, I know life has been challenging over the past 4 or 5 years, so we have to celebrate those little wins. Okay, so the road, yes, stunning, not exactly the right tool for the job. So driving dynamics, not exactly the discussion we have here. I would say more ride quality. And there, weight is your friend. Weight usually a bad thing in performance cars, weight usually a bad thing in EVs. But here, we've got about a 500-pound weight penalty going from a basic standard IC Tucson to this. And one would think that's a bad thing, especially, say, over broken pavement. Actually, no, you don't feel it at all. But let's come to a stop here. And which way are we going to go? I think we should go that way. And the big thing you notice, the ride quality is significantly better here because it's not as disturbed as it is in the lighter car. So no, there aren't any adjustable dampers, there's no fancy tuning to this. This is one of these vehicles that's designed to still be like a regular old crossover. If you remember, we drove the updated Santa Fe, actually totally new Santa Fe. There's something going on there that it's a different class of vehicle now, even though, dirty little secret, the wheelbase on that is only 2 inches longer than this. It's a very similar sized vehicle, but what they're doing there with the calculus of the suspension tuning is more of a, dare I say, a luxury car in the Hyundai world. So there's a huge difference in the ride quality of these two vehicles. Not that this is bad, it's just more pedestrian. So that's where we get back to the whole weight, and that in turn makes the ride quality more supple. So let's you and I cut to the chase of this little telenovela featuring Hyundai. The Tucson Hybrid is the better version of the Tucson. That was the same finding that we learned in the first version of this generation of Tucson, so that's not the surprise. Why do I bring this up? That has to do with money. You see, the most basic internal combustion engine Tucson is actually very inexpensive. It's about the same price as a Camry, just under $29,000. However, if one wants a hybrid, there is a blue model, which is also the lightest, which also makes it more fuel efficient. That one, instead of 35, 35, 35, it's 38, 38, 38, which is wonderful, right? Also the cheapest, 33 grand. So one pays a huge price to get a hybrid. But we're not driving the blue, we're driving the fancy one. However, we can't get to that one right away because there's an SEL, that's the one everyone's gonna buy. It's got some stuff in it, like a power driver's seat, more bits on the inside. That one starts at just over $36,000. Then a stop on this chart that I find very confusing. There is something called an N-line flavor of the Hyundai Tucson Hybrid. For the life of me, I do not understand why it exists. Basically, it changes some of the trim, obviously the wheels, that kind of stuff. That's around $38,000. But this one with the fancy leather seats, the power seat on the other side, all sorts of things, even a head-up display. Another thing that changes, believe it or not, the shifter is going on the column in the fancy ones. It's still on the console in the cheaper ones. That sounds very expensive. I'd love for someone in engineering to explain that one to me. This one is $40,940. And that brings us back to the calculus of the options game. If one really had to have matte paint on their nondescript crossover, that's an additional $1,000. If that's too rich for your blood, white or silver, which they tell me very special, $470. Then these, where are they made? No, not in the southeast of the good old US of A. Rather, all of the hybrids are made in Ulsan, Korea. That is reflected in the destination handling, $1,395. I'd like to point out, and I've said this before, the most expensive destination and handling this side of a Lamborghini that is shipped in a container with pillows, which brings us to a total retail price of $42,345. Now that brings us to a very good question. At that price, yes, very good capable vehicle. However, for that same money, one can have a larger three-row that's pretty well equipped from many different manufacturers, even Hyundai, like in the Santa Fe. So, what would you do? Comments below. So I've told you guys many times before, I'm not a practical human being, but with vehicles like this, we need to exercise our practical muscle. This is where a 6-footer would sit, more than plenty of room. That's one of the benefits of having the wheelbase here of one of their larger vehicles. There are some fancy bits here because we've learned over the years that Hyundai, they don't really sell cars by the ounce like Europeans do. They sell them by the pound. You get more for your money. So I got like heated seats back here, or I have an armrest, or I have not one but 2 USB-C ports if I need to charge my vehicle, which the Rugrats probably want to do. But more importantly, some good news. You know how you and I, we piss and moan about stupid little details. You know what, let's rephrase that. These aren't stupid details. Why? Because they're tactile details. That's how you feel when you touch something on the inside of a car. That's what makes you think, is the car cheap or does it feel better than what you paid for it? In the Tucson, when they did the whole refresh back a couple years ago, the interior looked really cool. But man, oh man, it was bargain basement in terms of the materials. And we said that on camera. Apparently someone was listening, because inside this vehicle, granted, this one's the limited, so it has the fancy leather seats and more details, like some better equipment. But just the feel of the top of the door panels, top of the dash, so much better. Drastic difference. Someone, I'd like to say, was listening to my episode, but I'm thinking they're realizing the competition probably has pushed them farther. Now, speaking of competition, of course, they had to change the dashboard. Now, Hyundai will tell you it's all because they want to give you more apps. The real reason they changed that dashboard, both in design and to acclimate it to other Hyundai and Kia products, if we're honest, because it's cheaper. Okay, so now that we have the elephant in the room out of the way, it's not entirely bad news, because usually when we get all screens, we lose real buttons, which makes the vehicle less safe to drive. Because we've talked about this many times. Where your fingers go, that's where your eyes go. So if you're looking at a screen, you're not looking forward, and that's when cars do stupid things. They still have hard knobs, buttons, rocker switches, that kind of stuff. Now, it's not entirely puppy dogs and roses. The rest of the HVAC controls, there, they kind of gave in to the Tesla / haptic feedback mafia, where it's a screen. You're touching with your finger and your eyes go. We've discussed this. Anyway, and with that, they brought all the other details that we've seen in other updated Hyundais over the past 2 years. So overall, many more hits than misses. I wanted to take some time to reflect on today's experience now that I'm back at the hangar. I have a pretty clear vision on how one should approach the Tucson world. Probably unpopular, but clear vision. Now, we went into this knowing the hybrid would be the better choice over the internal combustion engine. I'm not saying this because I'm a fan of electrification or a huge proponent of it. I just feel in this case it's a significantly better mousetrap. But really, the unpopular opinion is I wouldn't do the very expensive version of the Tucson. And no, not because I'm a cheapskate, rather the basic one, the blue, with the higher fuel efficiency. Yeah, it's not as fancy, the interior isn't as nice, but the reality is this is further proof that one doesn't need to spend 50 grand, or now the average price of a new car, $48,000, in order to get something that's affordable, like a Camry at 28, but I get some people would need more packaging space, hence the 2-box design. And here's one for $33,000. And I say that for another reason. At $42,000, lovely car, but there are more choices there. One could have the 3-row Santa Fe, or one could have the Palisade, which is even bigger, or many other choices beyond the Hyundai world. And that in turn brings us to the wish list, and yet another unpopular opinion. This is one of the very few cases where I would advocate for getting rid of the basic internal combustion engine only version. Now, I don't say this again because I'm a huge fan of electrification or EVs. Rather, I'm a cheapskate. I want to see the cost of entry, the base price, come down by a lot. And the only way to do that is to amortize the cost of the electric motors over the entire production run, not just the hybrids. So I'm thinking, can we bring it down to like just below 30 grand? I know, huge ask, But if we make the entire production run of something that sells 250,000 units a year, which these do, I think we could potentially get there. But I'm one man, and this is the point of the episode. I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you found this discussion fascinating, I would highly suggest you watch one of our discussions with the folks at Savage Geese about the rising price of new cars. It was enlightening and, let's just say, almost infuriating. You can check out that episode here. Until I see you in the next episode, Bish Beta.